The comedy mystery movie Clue has 3 different endings, 3 different solutions, 3 different murderers, more or less. Clue is a cornerstone of murder mystery cinema, and it's been a favorite of mine since childhood, but it's important to remember that it's a parody. Having multiple endings is one of the film's endearing qualities, but for many murder mystery enthusiasts, there's nothing so satisfying as knowing the murderer could only ever have been one person, or party. That's what makes it meaningful if you figure out the solution. If the screenwriter just chooses the character they think audiences will be least likely to suspect, and then sticks in some obscure clue to make it legit, that's, well, cheap. Agatha Christie chose her murderers with great care, and always made the solution a fair one. Physically and psychologically, the killer had to be one person, and one person only, so to speak. The only way the killer could be someone else is if the plot and characters were to fundamentally change from how they were written. Today I want to talk about 7 Agatha Christie adaptations where the murderer's identity changed. I'm going to ask questions like, why did it change? Does it work? And would I recommend the adaptation? Please note, I'm not counting films such as 1928's The Passing of Mr. Quin, where the murderer was combined with another character, or others such as Elephants Can Remember and The Case of the Missing Will, where a murderer was added. Number 1. Ordeal by Innocence. This 1958 novel has been adapted several times. The one that changed the killer's identity is the 2018 miniseries starring Bill Nye, but that's not all it changed. In the book, Arthur Calgary returns from abroad and learns that a man named Jacko Argyle has died in prison after being tried and convicted for murder. Arthur is horrified. He was with Jacko at the time the murder took place, but because he left the country, Arthur never knew Jacko needed someone to provide him with an alibi. He feels morally obligated to solve the murder and posthumously clear Jacko's name. Now, it's true, the book does more resemble an ensemble drama than a straight-up detective story, but this miniseries leans hard into it. Practically all the characters receive extensive backgrounds and storylines, but their effect seems geared more toward shock value than making the characters more interesting, more rounded. One character in the book, Hester, grows from hating her deceased mother into realizing they could have become friends despite their damaged relationship. In the series, well, let's just say their relationship is irreparable. She and her siblings eventually work out their issues, but that happens off-screen. This story is not about growth, it's about people hurting each other in terrible ways. One of the other 2 murder attempts from the book is left out, yet the story is more violent overall. The original solution revealed a conspiracy between Jacko and the housekeeper, Kirsten, whom Jacko had seduced. Jacko had selected Arthur to be his alibi for the murder, not knowing Arthur was about to leave the country. The miniseries dumps all of this and makes the victim's husband, played by Bill Nye, the killer. The husband falsely imprisons Arthur in a mental institution, but then he himself is imprisoned by his own family, so happy ending? Despite characters sharing names with those in the book, this is very much a pseudo-adaptation, much like other Agatha Christie miniseries adapted by Sarah Phelps. Some of them are quite compelling, or at the very least it's interesting to see how the story has been twisted into a completely new shape. This is not one of those. It might be full of emotion, but there's little catharsis. I would recommend giving it a miss. Number 2. And Then There Were None. This novel has been adapted perhaps more than any other Agatha Christie, but the adaptation I'm talking about is the 2005 computer game. In the original story, 10 people who got away with murder in the past are lured to an island and executed one at a time. People find evidence that someone was still alive after the 10th death, but there were only ever 10 people on the island, so it seems to be an unsolvable problem. Only a message found in a bottle reveals the truth, that Judge Wargrave was the killer, having faked his death halfway through the killings and then committing suicide once they were complete. The computer game takes the ferryman, Narracott, and makes him the playable character who investigates the mystery. The plot more or less remains true to the book, bringing in 1 or 2 elements from the 1945 film adaptation, but at the conclusion there are multiple alternative endings. Under certain circumstances, the killer turns out to be Emily Brent, who is, or was secretly the owner of the island. Her primary target was Judge Wargrave, who sentenced the love of her life to death. She killed all these other people along with him, apparently because she thought it would make him suffer more. She faked her own death by using a kind of cure-all antidote. Now, I haven't actually played this game, so I don't know that I can credibly offer a recommendation one way or the other. I do know that for a computer game based on so classic a story, it makes sense to offer a fresh payoff for making it through all the challenges, but it doesn't sound to me like they thought through their new ending as well as they could have. Again, I haven't yet played the game, so if and when I do, I might find that the story choices aren't as hackneyed as they seem. But I doubt it. Number 3. The Body in the Library. This 1942 Miss Marple novel depicts the murders of two young girls. In the end, it turns out only one of them was the target. She stood in the way of the murderers inheriting a fortune. The other victim was a decoy to provide the killers with alibis. The two murderers in this case are a man and a woman, Mark and Josie, who are secretly married. However, the 2004 adaptation, starring Geraldine McEwen, changes Josie's accomplice from Mark to another character, named Adelaide. Instead of being secretly married, they're secret lovers. Plot-wise, this change functions just fine. Adelaide is in exactly the same position as Mark to inherit the money, so little to none of the rest of the story is affected. That said, I'm not at all sure that it works, largely because I'm not sure why the screenwriters made this choice. I don't think this counts as casual representation, so what were the adapters trying to say? The film takes time to establish how these characters became lovers in the first place, after we're made aware of what horrible things they did. Forgetting that, this love story might come off as sweet. Are we supposed to feel sorry for these two characters? Are we supposed to feel uncomfortable and conflicted because we feel sorry for them? Are we supposed to be saying, oh, how tragic the end can be when two people fall in love? Or is it just a simple case of putting a spin on a familiar trope? Two lovers blinded to morality by their passion, except this time they're queer.
Because when you're in love, you think you're invincible. It blinds you. And you don't seem to care.
As one of my commenters pointed out, this is part of a long list of films where LGBTQ characters are associated with violence, in this case as perpetrators. I'm all for increasing character diversity and social commentary, but it's important to be careful of falling into regressive tropes. All of that aside, I'm personally turned off from this film by the upsetting scene where Adelaide strangles the terrified schoolgirl. If you're not triggered by that sort of thing, and if you're curious to see how you interpret the new solution, I'd say give it a watch, as the rest of it is pretty solid. Mostly. Number 4. The Sittaford Mystery. Like most films where Miss Marple has been added to the story, this 2006 rendition is a pseudo-adaptation, but it's not as easy to tell as with others. The film retains the main characters, the setting, and even the mechanics of the solution. The murderer still uses a pair of skis to fake an alibi, but instead of the victim's resentful best friend, it's the investigative reporter who's been made into the victim's abandoned son, out for revenge. The film gives a nod to this change by having the murderer from the book and the murderer from the film swap names. My guess is that the reason they made such extensive changes was an awareness of what kind of mysteries audiences were hungering for at the time. Most likely, the producers suspected that people would be more interested in a closed-circle mystery with a darker tone and much higher stakes, even if the end result went a little over the top. As a film unto itself, I really like it. The only real downside to the new version is that the solution comes awfully close to that of Hercule Poirot's Christmas, which also involves a murderer who's secretly the victim's son, come to avenge his father's abandonment of him and his mother. I give this one a strong recommendation. Number 5. The Secret of Chimneys. This 1925 novel is half whodunit, half political thriller. One of the protagonists is Anthony Cade, who needs to solve the mystery because he himself is implicated as the culprit. One of the investigators, Inspector Lemoine, suspects him of being a murderous jewel thief known as King Victor. But at the end, in one of the greatest reveals of any Agatha Christie, Anthony proves that King Victor is Lemoine himself. Two other characters introduced in this novel are Eileen Brent, also known as Bundle, and her long-suffering father, Lord Caterham. These characters are, frankly, beloved, so much so that they return to star in the standalone sequel, The Seven Dials Mystery. Well, it's a bit of a slap in the face when the Chimneys adaptation featuring Miss Marple changes the whole story, the situation, the relationships, even the victims, and makes Lord Caterham the murderer. At first I ascribed these egregious changes to a lack of familiarity with the Agatha Christie oeuvre on the part of the screenwriter, but there are several signs that he's well versed in it, which makes it even worse. This might have been forgivable if, like with the Sittaford Mystery, the new story was well done and entertaining, but such is not the case. I did not give a damn which manhole Virginia would choose in the end, and frankly that subplot just reeked of Twilight. Honestly, if they really wanted to film a new Miss Marple story, why didn't they adapt another of her short stories? Or at the very least, put her in a story where she would fit better, rather than stick her in a story where she doesn't fit at all, and twist and warp everything out of shape in a ridiculous attempt to pretend this is Agatha Christie. Believe it or not, this is not the bottom of the barrel. Hey guys, I'm going to interrupt this video really quick because I want to talk about Agatha Christie She Watched by Teresa Pascal. This book is fantastic. It's the most comprehensive guide to Agatha Christie film and TV adaptations that I've ever found. As a matter of fact, when I was editing this video, I realized I'd made what would have been a really embarrassing mistake, and I caught it thanks to this book. I really like how it's organized, mostly by detective, starting with Miss Marple. It gives And Then There Were None its own section just because there's so many adaptations of it. It also has a section on Agatha Christie herself as a character, like the Doctor Who episode where they go back in time and meet her. Each and every adaptation has its own 2-page review. I don't necessarily agree with all of them, but definitely the majority, and when we do agree it tends to be for the same reasons. The very best part of this book is the rating system. Each adaptation is graded on a scale of 1 to 5, but instead of stars, it's whatever murder method was used in the story. You can see the guns there, knives, falling off a cliff, axes or hatchets, I guess, sugar hammers. And when we get to poisons, it doesn't just give you generic poison, it gives you poisoned wine glasses, poisoned chocolates, even poisoned sandwiches. Of course, when they get to And Then There Were None, they have to use multiple methods. Aww. Kitty cats. Anyway, you can find this book on Amazon, and you can check out the author's website, pascalpress.com. She also has a podcast. That's it. Number 6. The Alphabet Murders. In the 1936 novel The ABC Murders, a serial killer targets victims with names beginning with certain initials. All of this is a blind so that the killer can get away with one murder and thus inherit a fortune. His scapegoat is a man named Alexander Bonaparte Cust. In the 1965 film, Cust's counterpart is a young woman named Amanda Beatrice Cross, who, like Cust, seems to believe she actually committed the murders. Okay, plot-wise, this still works. Until it's revealed at the end that not only is she in league with the man who planned all this, but she actually carried out all the murders. That's right, her plan was to convince everyone she was a homicidal maniac, fake her own death, and then pose as the millionaire's widow so that she could collect her inheritance. The millionaire in this version, by the way, was a guy she worked for. Setting aside all the other ways this story was dumbed down, the whole point of blaming the murders on a homicidal maniac was that the maniac had no connection to the real victim. That's what made the plan work. That's what made it genius. I love when movies add some comedy, but here the comedy relied on every single character being stupid. Most of the characters in the original Poirot stories consider him to be a joke. This movie made them right.
She did.
All in all, it's best, if not easily, forgotten. Number 7. Appointment with Death. The last adaptation on this list is the most interesting because this change was made by Agatha Christie herself. Christie wrote the novel Appointment with Death in 1938, but then adapted it into a stage play in 1945. Overall, the story is the same. Mrs. Boynton, a former prison wardress, exerts sadistic dominance over her children, and when she's murdered, they finally seem to have their freedom, except now they're all under suspicion for murder. Originally, the murderer was a member of Parliament named Lady Westholme, whom Mrs. Boynton recognized as a former prison inmate. In the play, Lady Westholme is still present, but the murderer has been changed to Mrs. Boynton herself. She's just found out that she doesn't have long to live, and rather than having grown bored of messing with her kids, she's determined to keep control of them, even from beyond the grave. She's such an asshole that she kills herself in order to deliberately cast suspicion on her children for her untimely death. I'm a big fan of the original solution, and I couldn't say for sure why Agatha Christie did it. This is pretty much the only time such a change happened. But holy shit, this is good too! Christie managed to do what few, if any, adapters of her work have done. She delivered a fresh, knockdown denouement to one of her stories just by changing a single character's motivation, and the new ending built on a theme that already existed. I think the lesson here is that unless you're Agatha Christie, you probably shouldn't be changing the endings to her stories. If you think you need to change something in order to make the original ending more powerful, more awesome, then go for it. But otherwise, why mess with it? If the only way to tell your story is to pretend it's someone else's, well, it's probably not going to be received the way you want. Now, I haven't seen every Agatha Christie movie, so if you've seen one that changes the murderer and isn't on this list, please tell me, but without spoiling the ending. I'll put it on my watch list, and who knows, it might even make its way onto this channel. Thanks for watching.